All right. So one thing that's I'm inspired. The Spirit does work because you were talking about that. You said the two words, she prayed. And I'm going to be talking about two people today who prayed. And that's how everything came together in their life. And also, a lot of you know Kitty. I don't know if you can see. Oh, let me get into the camera there. Can you see Kitty there? John Burke. Yes. Everybody know Kitty? Anyway, her story, that's John Burke's mother-in-law. Her story is in the book, in the book, Faith on the Mountains. And it's got this, and she has this great quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. She said, "The important thing today is that we should be able to discern from the fragment of our life how the whole was arranged and planned, and what material it consists of. I'm thinking, for example, of the art of the fugue. If our life is but the remotest reflection of such a fragment, if in a short time we accumulate a wealth of themes and weld them together in a pleasing harmony and keep the great counterpoint going all through, when it comes to an untimely conclusion, we can still sing the grand chorale and will not bemoan the fragmentariness of our life, but rather rejoice in it." Then she tells us, you got to read it. The story here is just, you can make a movie out of this story. I mean, she lived in 5 different continents. She went through widowhood. She was in Siberia. I mean, in prison during the war. It was and I lived in a military town, so I've heard stories, but this is up there in the top 5. I mean, this is something. So you'd have to hear it. But the reason I read that is because Luke, he prayed. Luke was big on prayer. Luke's called the gospel of prayer a lot of times. And Luke was not a witness, but he put together all the fragmentary pieces to make a puzzle. He heard Paul's story. Well, he knew Paul. He heard Paul's story. He heard Philip's story. He heard Mary's story. And he wove them together in a theme. And I'm a really big Bach fan. In fact, this morning I was listening to Bach's Fugue in D minor. I think that's the one that my wife says, I think they're still tuning up the organ every time she hears it. I said, it's supposed to be kind of strange or alien. Anyway, the Bach things, all of these have these polyphonic melodies. Bach has, like, for you musicians, as you know, a lot of melodies that interact and all come together. That's Acts. That's the book of Acts. The book of Acts is all these melodies that interchange. And we have 2 melodies here. We have Cornelius. He's one of the melodies. And he's at the hour of prayer. We're talking about prayer. And he's praying. And he always prays. The Greek text indicates that he always prays and consistently and continually gives money to charity. So he prays and he acts on what he's doing on the prayer. And while he's doing it, one of these days, an angel shows up. And it was like later on in one of the texts, it says, was a shiny angel. And he said, "What's going on?" The angel says, "Hey, Cornelius." And I always think of when you pray, sometimes you're surprised. This is an odd joke, but in the New Yorker, there was a really great, the New Yorker cartoons. They're very funny. This one guy's praying and he's kneeling at his bed, and this big, giant Norse warrior shows up in a cloud with, thunder in his hand and a sword and everything. And it's Zeus, and the guy's praying and said, "Okay, when I was praying, I was kind of looking for Yahweh." Okay. Anyway, I thought it was funny, but all right. So it's just the idea that sometimes you're surprised in prayer. And he was, this angel shows up, and he had some fear. Usually the people say, "Don't be afraid," but this angel went straight to, "I have some orders for you." And by the way, every time a Roman centurion shows up in Luke's gospel, it's very positive. Luke's the gospel where there's a Roman centurion who was building a synagogue for the Jewish people back. And so that's a big deal. And he had great favor with the people. So this guy's the commentators don't know what he is. Is he a God-fearer? Is he part of the synagogue? But anyway, God knows what he is. He prays and he gives. So he says, "I have a mission for you. Go get Simon, a certain Simon, who is staying with Simon the tanner, who lives by the sea." And there's a little humor there in the passage, because there's 2 Simons. There's Simon who lives by the sea, who's a tanner, and Simon Peter, who's a certain Simon. And so he's sorting that out. Simon who's staying with Simon. Anyways, Luke in humor. So he sends two of his guys from his household, because he said not only that's another thing, his whole household believes. That's another Lucan theme. Lydia, the Philippian jailer, Cornelius, their household beliefs. A true leader of their household brings her whole household in, and that's always an incredible thing when that happens. So they, and by the way, this is just a personal note. I have my grandkids in and out now, and for the first time they're back. They just came back after a year. And you do feel a certain responsibility for the salvation of your whole household. It's a real thing. But anyway, so Cornelius sends two guys and his top aide, who are all believers, or believers in the sense of the Jewish God, not the Roman gods, and giving charities. And the Jerusalem Bible said giving to Jewish charities. So they head out and they go to Joppa. And Joppa's in the Italian centurions in Caesarea. So they go to Joppa. It was about 30 miles away. And so they get to Peter, and they get to the gate of Simon the tanner's house. And the Greek text indicates it's a very large gate. In other words, he lives in a nice house by the sea, a really nice house in Carmel. Kind of visualize that, and about as far from Santa Cruz to Carmel, about the same distance, so it's about, so it was quite a ways. So he stands there, and then when he gets there, he tries to worship Peter. Peter tells him to get up. But meanwhile, here's the other melody that's going on. It's actually a strong melody. Well, Cornelius is doing all that and sending people down. Peter has been in the house by the sea and staying with Simon, who's a tanner. And while he's there, he has a dream. And I think if we can get screen sharing, I've got screen share here. Let's see if I can pull this off. Keynote. I might not be able to pull that. We'll try it. It's really, we're seeing. Keynote. Okay. Keynote. Okay, dear. All right. Open up Keynote. I had it open earlier. Applications, sorry. Keynote, there it is. Okay, we're going to be able to pull it off. Keynote. It's taking a minute to launch. I don't know why. Okay, come on, launch. Okay, file, open recent, back study. Okay, so now let me go to screen share. Share screen. Desktop 2. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great. Okay, so there's various interpretations of this dream Peter has. And a sheet comes out of heaven, and the language indicates what's really interesting. The language indicates that it's a really nicely knitted sheet. It's like a first-class sheet. It's like from, Serta Bed Company or something, It's got 4 corners. It's beautifully cut. And I could just see Peter's wife, remember Peter was wife, if she saw this saying, why would God put a bunch of animals in a nice sheet? But anyway, so he's in this sheet, and he sees all these animals, and there's a bunch of interpretations of it. Let's see if I can get another. There's a fun one. Let's see if we can get another one. There's one. There's one. There's one. Anyway, they're kind of cute. So I'll quit sharing. So anyway, I'll quit screen sharing. All right. So are we back on? So he sees this dream, and when he wakes up and he's hungry, he's praying and he falls asleep and he's hungry. And God says, rise, Peter, arise, wake up, kill and eat. And Peter says, hey, no way. I stick to a strict kosher diet. I have never eaten anything unclean or common. And God says, never call anything unclean or common, which God has made clean. And Peter was mystified by this. And then the vision happened 3 more times. Now that's called the Hebrew triplicate. Maybe Ed's told you about this, but in Hebrew thinking especially, there's the 3 times. And here's how it works. If you tell your kid to clean his room, clean your room, clean your room, you're not supposed to have to tell me, that commandment is hanging in the air and you don't have to do it anymore. And it happens in scripture when it says, whoa, whoa, whoa. That means the woe is up there. Or holy, holy, holy. The holy is up, That's the state of play. The state of play is he's got this thing 3 times. And Peter was mystified by all this. So meanwhile, while he's thinking about it on the roof, the people come down and the Spirit tells him to come on down. I want you to notice that Peter was praying, Cornelius was praying, and so they were both at the hour, put together these 2 themes, 2 prayers. They go together, they get down. Cornelius goes to worship Peter. Peter says, get up, I'm just a man. And that would have been incredible for a Roman centurion, who's a commander of a division of troops, an Italian commander of a division of troops, Roman troops, to worship him. Peter says, get up, we're both guys here, let's talk, And then the centurion gives him the whole story, or the centurion's, I think it's the centurion's leader. Anyway, gives him the whole story, and he fetches Peter, brings Peter up to Caesarea, and Peter stays with him. And remember, he wasn't supposed to associate with Gentiles, but he finally figures out what's going on. So he says, I see that God has made everybody clean, and he doesn't judge by, and it says he's no respecter of persons in the King James. The best thing is, and this is kind of weird because we wear a mask now, it says God doesn't judge by our mask. He judges by what's behind the mask. Now, it's not a political statement about whether to wear or not wear a mask. Don't get that out of that. Anyway, it's because, they didn't have COVID back then. So he says, this is mask. They were talking about theater masks. The Greeks had theater masks they would hold up. So God is not judging by your appearance. Anybody remember 2nd chapter of Acts? Really old song, Hear the Bell Ringing, God. Well, anyway, one of their songs was, all I can change is my appearance, and that doesn't mean anything. Okay, so God doesn't change by appearance. He loves everyone who does his will, which is kind of strange. It's a little bit legalistic. So then Peter gives this long sermon, and in the long sermon, right in the middle of it, the Spirit falls on the Gentiles. So that's called the Gentile Pentecost, just like the Spirit fell on the Jews. And it says the circumcised were amazed that the Gentiles fell in. And Peter jumped on it. Now, remember last week, Ed talked about when we see miracles, it's good to keep talking about them. But I have a theory, and this comes, I'm going to quote the most famous theologian I know, which is my wife. She said, a lot of times when we're in restaurants and stuff, I'm still talking. Like here, I'm still talking, and you're probably thinking, it's time to stop, Larry. So anyway, I'm still talking, and I talk to the chef. I talk to this is before COVID. I talked to the waiters, and my wife walks out of the car and she says, wait a minute, where are you? She comes back in, she goes, are we still talking? And then a lot of times when we're doing a project at our last church, like getting ready to feed the poor, or planning to cook a dinner for the needy, or opening up a place for the homeless, I'd be talking to them all. And she always said, where are you? Are you still talking? It's time for action. And so Peter gets interrupted by God. I mean, he's talking, he's giving a sermon, and right in the middle of it, the Spirit falls on the Gentiles, and he says, what's to prevent them from getting baptized? So immediately, Peter, who has the keys to the kingdom because Christ gave them to him, opens the door of heaven, so to speak, to the Gentiles and lets them in. And by the way, that ties in with Barbara's story, since she married a Jewish man. And so there's a Gentile Jewish thing. She was a Protestant, he was Jew. It's a great story. You'll have to read it. Okay, so what does this mean to us? All for Peter, then Peter has to justify himself later in chapter 11, and then things go on, but then Peter has a complicated life, and it interacts with Paul and Philip, and it goes back and forth, and Luke. And all of this is about the fact that in prayer, there's all kinds of fragments of our life, and sometimes we totally don't understand them. And I'll give you a quick example from our life. When we were in Idaho, we were up there, and our first grandkid was born, who is now in the military. So this was a while back. Our first grandkid was born, and my wife really wanted to go back to California, but you don't just leave your church and go back to California, So anyway, we were there, and I was enjoying my church, and it was doing well in Idaho. And while I was there, the district boss, like the Joey Lee of the Redwoods district where I used to be, came up, and I ran into him because there was a synod meeting, and that was another bigger district. Now, to show you how God works, Idaho should have been in the Rocky Mountain district. It should not have been in the Pacific district. Papers late, like in the 1800s, to just show you how God links things together. Idaho filed their papers late. Because they filed their papers late, Idaho, which is obviously a Rocky Mountain state, became a Pacific state because the Pacific district or synod said, well, we don't care if you file your papers late. You can have as long as you want. Idahoans, of course, who are very libertarian, said, excellent. We're going to take it's like Bonnie Doon here, where I say, how long do you turn in your some kind of, how long before you turn these in? As long as you want. So Idaho joined the Pacific. So now that was like 100 years ago. And that affects me because here comes the district boss. He comes in, and then he has lunch with me, and he tells me how rural churches are nothing but trouble. Bonnie Doon is a rural church. I had a rural church in Idaho, and I love rural churches. I totally love them. And I said, what do you mean? He said, they don't do mission work. They don't do this. They don't do that. And like Bonnie Doon, which does a lot of mission work, you have India Partners, you do higher grounds, you help the community. My church in Idaho did all those things. So I told him, I said, that's not true. I said, rural churches do all those things. And I listed, and he said, well, rural churches are always flat broke. I said, that's not true. We have a building, just like you have a building fund. We had a building fund. It was very parallel to my Idaho church. So I think it was even the same altitude. Okay. So after I'm done with him, having lunch with him, and my wife is thinking, how are we going to get back to California? There's just no way. I get a call from the head of my district who says the head of the Redwoods district just called me and asked me all these questions and said, basically, was he lying about this? Was he lying about that? Was he lying? Was he making it up? And I said, what'd you say? Well, Elwood said I just told him what was true about the church. We get a call. We end up in California. That's why I'm standing right here. That's why I have grandkids in my house. That's why all the themes go together, because God controls everything. That's why I'm staying here today. That's why I have a Zoom camera. That's why Sue's out here. That's why Charlotte's here. That's why you're here, because God works things out. And it doesn't make sense to us while it's happening. It makes no sense whatsoever while it's happening. But then it falls into place. And so my encouragement to you, or my blessing to you, is to remember that even when it seems crazy, God is working it out. And that's what Luke was proving in the book of Acts. That's the whole theme of the book of Acts, that all the melodies and counter melodies are one great opera that works together to glorify God. Amen. All right, I think we do a hymn now, right?